All right, in this video, what we're going to do is start working on our lobby and our lobby sidebar. So let's go ahead and open up source client components lobby. So for our lobby sidebar, that's going to contain buttons for logging in or creating a game. So let's actually start off by creating a constructor for our component. So we'll say constructor props, super props. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create two methods. I'm not going to add them as methods to the component itself, because when we actually implement these methods, they're simply going to be one line of code. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to say this dot underscore login equals empty lambda, which will do nothing. Maybe console log to do implement login. And then we'll do this underscore create game, and we'll do the same thing. Equals empty function with a console log to do create game. Now for our render, we're not going to be accepting any props just yet, or any state just yet, but we can write out our code a little bit. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create two variables. I'm going to say const can login equals true, const can create game equals true. We will be replacing these variables with actual variables that hook into the state of the application later, but I want to get all of the JSX out of the way first. So let's go ahead and return what our lobby sidebar is going to be. I'm going to say I'm going to open up a section with a class name of lobby dash or c dash lobby dash sidebar, C for component. Section. Inside of this, I'm going to create a div with the class name of mSidebar-actions. And then inside of this, I'm going to include the buttons. Now, whether you can log in or create a game will determine whether these buttons exist. Furthermore, I actually wanted to also add another variable. I want to say const create game in progress equals false. Again, we'll replace these later. But let's go ahead and write some JSX that will make buttons appear or disappear depending on if these flags that I have here at the top are true or false. So I'm going to open up two curlies, and I'm going to say if not can log in question mark null followed by a colon followed by a button. So this is some syntax that is going to take a little bit getting used to. Conditionally adding in elements into JSX requires that you open up a JavaScript expression using the curlies and then providing an expression inside of this. So you can't provide an if statement inside of this, because an if statement, well, is a statement. It's not an expression. And so we have to use the ternary expression in order to conditionally include stuff. And what I like to do, the syntax that I started to grow to really appreciate and like, is I will invert the condition for including an element by adding this not, negating this expression. And then for the true branch, it will print out null. And then for the false branch, I enter a new line and then include the JSX that I'm going to be writing. So again, it might look a little weird at first, but you will get used to it over time. So for our button, we will give it a class name of m-button and primary. We will give it an on-click of this underscore login, and we'll give it a text of login. Then we're going to do the same thing for our create game button. I'm going to say if not can create game question mark null. So if we can't create a game, return null for this. Otherwise, actually, I wonder if that would look better, to be honest. Yeah, I think that does. I'm going to put the colon above. And then I'm going to enter in a button. This button is going to have a handful of different properties on it, so I'm going to break it out. And then I'm going to put create game down here. And then for the properties, I'm going to pass in on click equals this create game, followed by disabled equals create game in progress, so it'll be disabled if create game is in progress, and then a class name of m-button good. So with that is our can login and our create game. Now, I did just hit Control S and our hot module replacement did not kick in. The reason for that is hot module replacement doesn't play very nicely with React Router. As a result, it's not going to be able to hot replace our top level components. But you know what? That's fine. Our internal components we will be able to hot replace. But now if we come over here and refresh, we should see two buttons, log in and create game. And if I click on them, we should see our to-dos show up. All right, so let's go ahead and let's write our styles for our buttons. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add this to our Client.scss. And it is going to be a little bit of a long rule. And so the reason I'm going to be doing the M button, primary, and good all inside of the Client.scss so we can reuse these buttons throughout this application. So just bear with me. On your end, actually, I should be able to do this here. Hide that, put this over here, close that. So we should be able to watch these buttons get styled as I go ahead and put them together. So in Client.scss, remember, do it here so it's included globally. Do not do this in variables.scss because variables.scss isn't going to be included everywhere. So we'll get repetition for everything you put in variables.scss with the exception of variables and mixins. But inside of Client.scss, we're going to do m-button. All right, let's get started. Margin 0, padding 5 pixels up and down, 8 pixels left and right. We're going to give a text a line of left, a box sizing of border box, an outline of none. So we have complete control now over the styles of this button. A border of none, a cursor of pointer, so it kind of appears like a link. A display of inline dash block, a text decoration of none, a default background of color neutral. So if I hit Control S, we should start to see these buttons get styled, and indeed they are getting styled. A color of color neutral dash text, a border radius of 3 pixels, and a transition of background with a cubic Bezier half circle. Actually, I want to have 700 milliseconds for the animation. Now, you'll notice that it actually takes a second to compile this file. Whenever I hit Control S, it takes a while for WebPack to do it. That's just because this file is including font awesome, meaning that if you change the Client.scss, the build times are like, oh, hold on. I never included variables, or did I? I did. I probably misspelled neutral. Anyway, you'll notice that the compile times are around 1 second. Just remember, for other smaller SCSS files that don't include font awesome, the compile times will be much faster. Anyway, I definitely misspelled neutral, and that should fix it. Where did that thing run off to? There it is. Yep, and that fixed it. We are now back recompiling. So now let's go ahead and do our disabled. So for disabled, I'm going to say, if you are disabled, or if you are disabled and you have a hover, go ahead and give it a background of lighten, oops, not lightness, lighten, color neutral, 5%, and I'm going to mark this as important. And give it a color of lighten, color neutral text of 50%, important, and a cursor of default. Then I'm going to give it a hover rule. The hover rule is simply going to do a background of darken, color, neutral, 5%. So now I should be able to hover over these guys and get that nice transition, which you might not be able to see because of the video compression, but I assure you it's there. And then I'm going to do, if you are a primary button, I'm going to give you a color of my favorite blue, color primary text, with a background of color primary. Actually, I'm going to reverse that. Doesn't make a difference, but I like doing backgrounds before colors generally. With a hover rule of background lighten color primary, 10%. And then we'll say, if you are a good button, then we will use a background of color good and a color of color good text with a hover of a background of lighten color good 10%. And those are buttons. I know we could have used something like Bootstrap or Foundation or something like that, but I generally stay away from those. in videos because I like kind of seeing all the CSS come together and have complete control over the layout. And you'll find that with the Flexbox and with some really sane defaults and variables that they don't provide as much value as frustration sometimes. But either way, our sidebar buttons are still, unfortunately, not getting properly styled. So let's take a look at why that is. These should be on their own lines. Could be I misspelled something, which is very, very common. So we do M sidebar actions, but we style it in app CSS as M sidebar buttons. Okay, I'm going to change the... I'm not going to change the CSS. I'm going to change the JSX. So let's reload. And now we have our login and create game buttons. So now we'll be able to reuse this button, M button, which I'll scroll through throughout the rest of the course. And we now have a properly styled sidebar. All right, so we don't have many more huge CSS classes left, but let's go ahead and style the rest of the lobby. Let's go ahead and create the game list. What we're going to do in the lobby is we're going to have a list of all the games as well as a chat area as well. So what I'm going to start off with is I'm going to create a stateless component down here at the bottom called game list. So I'm saying function game list, and it's going to take in games and join game. Now, it's important that game list starts with an uppercase G, otherwise JSX won't recognize it as a component. Instead, it'll try to render it out as a HTML element. Next thing to notice, like I said before in our earlier discussion of stateless components, I am accepting a single property, a single parameter here, and I'm using the object deconstruction syntax to acquire a reference to the games and the join game property. Then I'm simply going to return some JSX. So I'm going to start off with the section of class name c-game-list. Then I'm going to say games.length is greater than 0, question mark null, colon. So I'm saying if there are 0 games, remember I negated it. If there are 0 games, go ahead and write a div class name, no games, there are no games yet. Unsmiley face, and we'll go ahead and end that div. Then I'm going to say games.map game goes into, and I'm going to create a list of divs. So I'm going to start off on a new line, say div class name equals game. Now remember from the earlier video, whenever we are constructing a list of things, always be sure to add in a key. Whenever we render out an array at any point in time, whether it comes from games.map or it was an array we created our own, we must provide a key so that React knows how to map this bit of JSX with the components that are actually on the DOM. So what we're going to do now is the key is going to have a game.id. So each game object is going to have an ID property, and it's going to have an on-click of an anonymous function, join game game. Then we're going to have a div class name equals title. And inside of this, we'll do game.title. And then we'll have a div class name equals players. And inside of players, we are going to simply put in game.players.join, comma. So the players array is going to be an array of strings, each string representing a player name. And we're just going to join them all with a comma and print them out. Then finally at the bottom, the last div we're going to do is class name join-game, which will simply have the text join game. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and write our lobby container. So take a look at game list. I'm probably not going to scroll back up, but scroll back down. So if you want to pause the video, we'll scroll up to our lobby container. I'm going to do the same thing that we did with the lobby sidebar. I'm going to say constructor props super props, and then I'm going to say this underscore join game equals game, and I'm going to say something like console log and then template string to do join game game.title, which I believe is what I used there. Yes, I did. Okay, for the render, we're going to start off with saying const games equals empty array. Of course, in the future, we will be getting the list of games from a different source, an actual source that's connected to the state of the application. Then I'm going to return a div with the class name of c-lobby, not surprisingly. And inside of c-lobby, I'm going to put in a game list. And game list is going to have simply games equals games and join game equals this join game. And that's it. So with that, our game list is going to be rendered out. So if we come back here into Chrome and refresh, we should see there are no games yet. So let's go ahead and style that real fast. Let's jump into lobby.scss. And I'm going to go ahead and say import variables. I have to back up one directory. Then I'm going to do c-game-list. It'll be display of flex, flex wrap of wrap, flex shrink of 0. And I'll style no-games, which is what that div has a class name of, with a padding of 10 pixels, a margin bottom of 10 pixels, a background of color section border, a width of 100%, and a border radius of 3 pixels. So that's what it should look like now. Now let's write some fake data for our games. So going back into lobby, inside of games, I'm going to open up an object, give it a title of game1 with an ID of 1, with the players with an array of, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, terrible player names or whatever. And let's copy and paste that a couple times and change the numbers up a little bit. Be sure to change the IDs. If a ID appears more than once in a list, you're going to have a bad time. React is going to freak out. So make sure that you add this fake data in. Coming back here, let's reload, and we'll see all the games. Now, obviously, the flexbox is working, but that's not exactly how we want the games to look. You will notice, however, that we can click on them. Even though they're not styled, I can click on these, and we see to-do join game 2, and so on. All right, so let's get that styling out of the way as quickly as possible. I know it's not people's favorite things, but I like being very inclusive with these projects. Let's style the game. We're going to include raised. So that's that mixin that we made before. Immediately they look like they're raised up, kind of in a material design sort of way. We're going to give each one a margin of right of 10 pixels, a margin bottom of 10 pixels. I'm just going to hard code in widths and heights. Width of 170 pixels, a height of 140 pixels. Obviously, in a more production scenario, you would want to make this a little bit more responsive, which is very easy to do with the Flexbox, but that would just add more CSS for people to write, and I would get yelled at. So with that, now they look like these little cards, and I think that looks really cool. We'll give them a display of flex, not surprisingly, a flex direction of column, a cursor of pointer, and a transition of all 500 milliseconds cubic Bezier. Oh no, a transition of all that. Then we'll style the title. The title will have a font weight of bold, a margin bottom of 5 pixels, a font size of header font size, a background of EEE. Not sure entirely why I hard-coded that in, but whatever. I don't want to jump back into the variables right now. For players, we'll flex grow it by 1. So what that'll do is by flex growing the players, it'll jump the join game button all the way to the bottom because the players are taking up the remainder of that space. We'll give them an overflow of hidden just in case there's so many players that it overflows. And we will give a padding of 0 up and down, 10 left and right. So now things are looking pretty good. Let's do our join game. It'll have a text align of center, a padding of 5 pixels, a font weight of bold, and a color of color-primary. And then let's do our hover state. Our hover state is going to have a background of white and a box shadow of 2px, 2px, 4px, RGBA 000.2. So now, that's looking pretty good. So we basically have the vast majority of the lobby styled now. The only thing left to do is add in the chat component, the chat box, and style that. And we'll do that in the next video. Then after that, the lobby will be done as far as all of our markup and React is concerned. So with that, we'll see you guys in the next video.